It was one of those cool, gray afternoons in Los Angeles when the sky seemed undecided, with the sun occasionally peeking through the clouds but never fully committing to brightening the day. The city hummed along in its usual rhythm, cars darting through intersections, street vendors calling out to passersby, and people lost in their own little worlds as they hurried from one place to another. Amid the hustle, Keanu Reeves strolled along the quieter side streets, blending in effortlessly despite his global fame. He had always preferred it this way, moving through life with a quiet presence, observing more than participating, finding comfort in the ordinary. Keanu wasn't headed anywhere in particular. He often took these long walks when he wasn't filming, letting the city's pulse guide him, feeling grounded by the people and the stories hidden in every corner. It reminded him of his younger days before Hollywood, when life was simpler and every day felt like an open-ended journey. Today felt like one of those days. He had his headphones tucked in his pocket, but he didn't need them. The sounds of the city were enough. As he turned down a familiar street, a small diner caught his eye. Maggie's Deli. It wasn't fancy or trendy, just a modest little spot with chipped paint on the window frames and a neon sign that flickered whenever the wind picked up. Keanu had been there a few times over the years, drawn by its unpretentious charm and the comforting smell of freshly baked bread that always seemed to linger around its entrance. He hadn't planned on stopping, but something about the place today felt inviting, like it was calling him in. Pushing open the door, the familiar jingle of the bell overhead announced his arrival. The warmth inside was immediate, a stark contrast to the cool breeze outside. The walls were lined with old photographs of smiling families, faded newspaper clippings, and postcards from customers who had moved away but never forgotten the little deli. The scent of brewed coffee mixed with the savory aroma of soups simmering in the back, creating a cozy, welcoming atmosphere. Keanu glanced around. It was late in the afternoon, and the lunch crowd had long since cleared out. A few regulars sat at the counter, sipping coffee and chatting quietly with the waitress. But in the far corner of the diner, by the window where the light struggled to filter through the cloudy glass, Keanu noticed something that pulled at his attention. A man and a little girl. The man looked to be in his mid-30s, his face lined with the kind of weariness that life's hardships etch into a person over time. His jacket was a size too big, the fabric fraying at the cuffs, and his shoes were scuffed, the soles nearly worn through. Across from him sat a little girl, no older than 7, with tangled blonde hair tied back in a ponytail that was starting to unravel. Her clothes were clean but mismatched, like they'd been handed down more than once. But it was her face that caught Keanu's heart, bright eyes full of innocence and wonder, completely unaware of the weight her father was carrying. They hadn't ordered anything yet. The man kept glancing at the menu, then back at his daughter, his brow furrowed in quiet worry. Keanu could see the internal struggle, the kind of decision no parent should have to make. Should he spend the last few dollars in his wallet on a meal for his daughter, or should he save it for something more pressing, like bus fare or rent? The little girl, blissfully unaware of the tension, chatted away, her tiny hands gesturing excitedly as she told her father some story about school or a game she played. Keanu slid into a booth near the counter, his back partially turned so he could watch them without seeming intrusive. He ordered his usual, a turkey sandwich with extra mustard and a cup of black coffee, when the waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a tired smile, approached. But before she left, Keanu gently reached out, his voice soft. "Hey," he said quietly, nodding toward the father and daughter in the corner. "Have they ordered anything?" The waitress glanced over her shoulder, her expression softening. "Not yet. Think they're still deciding." Keanu hesitated for a moment, then made a decision. "When they do, bring them whatever they want, and put it on my tab. But don't tell them. Just say it's taken care of." The waitress paused, her eyes widening slightly as she recognized who he was. But Keanu's face held a quiet seriousness, and she nodded without saying a word, respecting his wish for anonymity. As Keanu sipped his coffee, he kept an eye on the pair from the corner of his vision. The waitress approached their table with a cheerful tone, gently encouraging them to order whatever they liked. The man hesitated, his pride battling with his situation. Keanu could see it, the reluctance to accept help, the fear of appearing weak in front of his daughter. But then the little girl's face lit up at the mention of pancakes, and the father's resolve softened. He nodded, ordering pancakes for his daughter and a simple sandwich for himself. When the food arrived, the little girl's eyes widened with delight. She clapped her hands, her excitement bubbling over as she dug into her stack of pancakes, syrup dripping down her chin. The father watched her for a moment, and Keanu saw the shift in his expression, a brief flicker of relief, the kind that comes when you realize, even for just one meal, your child doesn't have to feel the weight of your struggles. He picked at his sandwich, but most of his attention was on his daughter, her laughter filling the small diner like sunlight breaking through the clouds. Keanu finished his meal quietly, his heart warmed by the simple joy he had helped spark. He paid his bill, leaving a generous tip for the waitress and covering the father and daughter's meal without a word. As he stepped back into the cool afternoon, he didn't look back. He didn't need to. The memory of that little girl's laughter and the brief, grateful smile on her father's face were more than enough. He walked down the street, blending back into the city's rhythm, thinking about how sometimes the smallest gestures could make the biggest difference. Keanu had always believed in the power of kindness, but today that belief felt even stronger. What he didn't know was that this simple act would ripple far beyond that little diner, touching lives in ways he could never have imagined. The next morning, the city of Los Angeles stirred to life under a pale blue sky, the early sunlight casting long shadows across the streets. Keanu Reeves woke up in his modest home, the faint sound of birds chirping outside his window mingling with the distant hum of traffic. His morning routine was simple, almost meditative. He brewed a cup of coffee, black and strong, just the way he liked it, and sat by the window, staring out at the city as it slowly awakened. But today, his mind wasn't on his usual reflections or the projects he had lined up. It kept drifting back to the diner, to the man and his daughter, and that fleeting moment of connection. Keanu wasn't someone who easily forgot faces, especially when they were etched with the kind of silent struggles he'd seen in that father's eyes. The little girl's laughter, pure and uninhibited, had echoed in his mind all night. It was a sound that reminded him of his own childhood, of moments when small acts of kindness from strangers had made all the difference in his life. He wondered what their story was, what circumstances had brought them to that point where a simple meal could mean so much. Meanwhile, across the city, in a small run-down apartment on the edge of downtown, Tom Harris was stirring from a restless sleep. The thin blanket did little to keep out the early morning chill that seeped through the cracks in the walls. His daughter, Emily, was still asleep, her small frame curled up beside him on the worn-out couch that doubled as their bed. The events of the previous day played over and over in his mind. The unexpected kindness from a stranger, the warm meal that had filled their stomachs and lifted, even if just temporarily, the weight on his shoulders. Tom carefully got up, trying not to wake Emily, and moved to the small kitchenette. There wasn't much in the fridge, just a half-empty carton of milk and a few slices of bread, but it would have to do for breakfast. As he prepared their meager meal, he thought about the man who had paid for their food. The waitress hadn't said who it was, but Tom couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a random act of kindness. There was something familiar about the man's face, something about his quiet demeanor that lingered in Tom's memory. When Emily finally woke up, rubbing her sleepy eyes and stretching with a yawn, the first thing she asked about was the pancakes. "Daddy, do you think we'll see the pancake fairy again today?" she asked, her eyes wide with hope. Tom chuckled softly, ruffling her messy hair. "Maybe, sweetheart. But even if we don't, we'll be okay." But deep down, Tom knew things were far from okay. He had been out of work for months after the factory he'd worked at shut down unexpectedly. Jobs were hard to come by, especially when you didn't have a college degree or any special skills. The bills were piling up, and he was behind on rent. Every day was a struggle to make ends meet, and the weight of his responsibilities pressed heavily on his shoulders. But that meal, the simple act of a stranger covering their lunch, had sparked something in him. It was a reminder that there was still kindness in the world, even when everything seemed bleak. Later that day, Tom made a decision. He needed to know who had shown them that kindness, not just to thank them, but to understand why. It wasn't every day that someone went out of their way for a complete stranger, especially in a city like Los Angeles, where people were often too busy to notice anyone else's struggles. Tom and Emily returned to Maggie's Deli that afternoon. The familiar bell above the door jingled as they entered, and the warmth of the diner wrapped around them like a comforting blanket. The same waitress from the day before was behind the counter, refilling the customer's coffee. When she saw Tom and Emily, she smiled, a glimmer of recognition in her eyes. "Well, look who's back," she said, wiping her hands on her apron as she approached them. "Did those pancakes leave such an impression?" Tom returned her smile, though his was tinged with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. "They were the best pancakes Emily's ever had," he said, his voice soft. "But that's not why we're here. I wanted to thank you for yesterday, and I was hoping you might tell me who paid for our meal." The waitress hesitated, glancing around the nearly empty diner before leaning in slightly. "He didn't want anyone to know," she whispered, "but it was Keanu Reeves." Tom blinked, stunned. For a moment, he thought he'd misheard her. Keanu Reeves, the movie star. It didn't seem possible. Why would someone like Keanu Reeves, a Hollywood icon, take notice of them, let alone buy them a meal? But as he thought back to the man's face, the quiet, kind eyes, the unassuming presence, it all made sense. He'd heard stories about Keanu's humility and generosity, tales of him riding the subway like a regular person, helping strangers without expecting anything in return. But experiencing it firsthand was something else entirely. Tom left the diner in a daze, Emily's small hand gripping his as they walked down the street. The weight of the previous day's struggles hadn't disappeared, but there was something new in its place, a spark of hope, a belief that maybe things could get better. If someone like Keanu Reeves could show them kindness, maybe the world wasn't as harsh as it seemed. Maybe there was still good out there, waiting to be found. That evening, as Tom tucked Emily into bed, she looked up at him with sleepy eyes. "Daddy, do you think we can be like the pancake fairy one day?" she asked, her voice a soft whisper in the dimly lit room. Tom felt a lump rise in his throat, but he managed to smile. "Yeah, sweetheart," he whispered back. "One day we will." But fate had its own plans, and what started as a simple act of kindness was about to ripple far beyond anything Tom or Keanu could have imagined. The world, it seemed, wasn't done with their story just yet. The next few days unfolded in a way neither Tom Harris nor Keanu Reeves could have anticipated. For Keanu, life continued with its familiar rhythm: morning rides along the Pacific Coast Highway, casual stops at his favorite coffee shops, and quiet evenings reading scripts or playing his guitar. But the image of the father and daughter from Maggie's Deli lingered in his mind. He often found himself wondering how they were doing, whether that small gesture had made any real difference. Keanu wasn't one to dwell on his own acts of kindness, but something about that encounter felt different. It was as if their lives had intersected at just the right moment, leaving an invisible thread connecting them. On the other side of the city, Tom was grappling with a mix of emotions. The knowledge that a global superstar like Keanu Reeves had quietly paid for their meal felt surreal. But beyond the initial shock, it ignited a sense of possibility within him. For months, he had been trapped in a cycle of despair, weighed down by the constant fear of eviction, the inability to provide for Emily, and the overwhelming uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring. But now, for the first time in a long while, he felt hope. One evening, as Tom sat at their rickety kitchen table, a flickering light bulb casting shadows on the peeling wallpaper. He pulled out an old, battered notebook. It had been years since he'd written anything down, but the need to express his gratitude was too strong to ignore. He didn't have Keanu's contact information, and he doubted he'd ever run into him again. So he did the only thing he could think of. He wrote a letter. In his rough, straightforward handwriting, Tom poured out his thoughts onto the paper. He wrote about the struggles he and Emily had faced, the sleepless nights spent worrying about the future, and the helplessness he felt as a father unable to provide for his child. But more importantly, he wrote about the impact that single act of kindness had on them, how it had reminded him that there were good people in the world, that even in the darkest moments, there could be light. He thanked Keanu not just for the meal, but for the hope it had given him. He ended the letter simply, "You gave us more than food. You gave us a reason to believe again." Not knowing what else to do, Tom folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and addressed it vaguely, to Keanu Reeves, the kind stranger from Maggie's Deli. He knew it was a long shot, but something in his heart told him to try. The next morning, he and Emily walked to the nearest post office and dropped the letter into the mailbox. As they walked home, Emily skipped along the sidewalk, her small hand clutching his, unaware of the uncertainty that clouded Tom's mind. What Tom didn't realize was that fate was already at work. A few days later, the letter found its way into the hands of Maria Sanchez, the owner of Maggie's Deli. She had been sorting through a stack of mail when she noticed the odd envelope, addressed in a childlike scrawl. Curious, she opened it, her eyes widening as she read the heartfelt words. Maria had known Keanu was a regular at her diner, and though he never sought attention, she had heard whispers of his quiet generosity over the years. Moved by the letter, she decided to do something she had never done before: share the story. Maria snapped a photo of the letter, making sure to crop out any personal details, and posted it on the diner's modest social media page with a simple caption: "A small act of kindness can change lives. Thank you, Keanu Reeves, for reminding us all of the power of compassion." What happened next was something no one could have predicted. Within hours, the post began to gain traction. At first, it was just a few likes and comments from local patrons who knew of Keanu's reputation. But as the day went on, the story began to spread. People from all over the city, and then the country, started sharing the post. The heartfelt words of Tom's letter resonated with people in a way that transcended fame. It wasn't just about Keanu Reeves being a movie star. It was about the reminder that even the smallest gestures could have profound impacts on others. By the following morning, the story had gone viral. News outlets picked it up, framing it as the heartwarming story of Keanu Reeves' quiet kindness. Social media exploded with hashtags like #BeLikeKeanu and #KindnessMatters, and people everywhere began sharing their own stories of unexpected generosity. The world, it seemed, was hungry for something good, and this simple act of kindness had become the beacon they needed. Back in his apartment, Tom was completely unaware of the storm his letter had created. It wasn't until his phone, which usually sat silent on the kitchen counter, began buzzing nonstop with notifications that he realized something was happening. He picked it up, scrolling through messages from old friends, acquaintances, and even complete strangers who had somehow found his contact information. "Hey man, I just saw your letter on the news. That's amazing. Tom, is this real? Did Keanu Reeves really buy you lunch? Your story inspired me today. Thank you for sharing it." Tom's heart raced as he turned on the tiny, outdated television in the corner of the room. Sure enough, there it was, his letter, displayed on the evening news, with the anchor recounting the now viral story. Emily, sitting beside him, clapped her hands in excitement when she saw her name mentioned. "Daddy, we're famous." She giggled, her eyes wide with wonder. But Tom wasn't thinking about fame. His mind was spinning with disbelief, trying to wrap his head around how a simple thank you letter had reached so many people. He felt exposed, but also incredibly grateful. The outpouring of support was overwhelming. People were offering help, job leads, financial assistance, even offers of housing. For the first time in months, Tom felt like they might actually have a chance to turn things around. Meanwhile, Keanu was completely oblivious to the media frenzy. It wasn't until his publicist called him, her voice filled with excitement, that he found out. "Keanu, have you seen the news?" she asked breathlessly. "You're everywhere right now. That story about the father and daughter from the diner, it's gone viral." Keanu frowned, holding the phone to his ear as he sat on the steps outside his house. "What story?" His publicist quickly filled him in, explaining how the letter had surfaced online and was now spreading like wildfire. Keanu listened quietly, his heart swelling with a mix of humility and disbelief. He had never intended for his small gesture to become public knowledge. To him, kindness wasn't about recognition, it was about doing the right thing because it mattered. But as he scrolled through the news articles and social media posts later that evening, he realized something profound. This wasn't about him. The story had taken on a life of its own, inspiring people around the world to be kinder, to look out for one another, to believe in the goodness of strangers. And in that moment, Keanu understood that sometimes, even the smallest actions could spark a movement. The story of a simple lunch at a small diner had become a symbol of hope in a world that desperately needed it. But for Keanu and Tom, it was just the beginning. Their lives were about to intersect again, in ways neither of them could have ever imagined. The days following the viral explosion of Tom Harris's heartfelt letter felt surreal, both for Tom and for Keanu Reeves. What had begun as a quiet, anonymous gesture at a small, unassuming diner had snowballed into something neither of them could have predicted. The story was everywhere, on television, across social media platforms, and even on the front pages of national newspapers. It wasn't just a story about a celebrity doing something kind. It had become a beacon of hope for people around the world, a reminder that compassion could still thrive in an often harsh and indifferent world. For Tom, the attention was both overwhelming and life-changing. His phone didn't stop ringing. Friends and family he hadn't spoken to in years reached out, expressing their shock and support. Strangers sent messages of encouragement, many of them sharing their own stories of struggle and resilience. Some offered job leads, others offered donations, and a few even offered places to stay. Tom was grateful, but also a little wary. He had spent so long feeling invisible, quietly fighting his battles in the shadows, that the sudden spotlight felt almost too bright. But every time he felt unsure, he'd look at Emily, her face glowing with excitement, and remind himself that this attention might be the key to a better life for both of them. Mealy, of course, was thrilled. For a 7-year-old, the idea of being on TV and having people talk about her magic pancakes was like something out of a fairy tale. She told everyone she met, neighbors, kids at the park, even the cashier at the grocery store, that Keanu Reeves had bought her pancakes, and now the whole world knew about it. Her innocence and joy were a balm to Tom's frayed nerves, grounding him in the reality that despite the chaos, this was a good thing. But while Tom navigated the flood of attention, Keanu found himself grappling with a different kind of reflection. He had always been known for his humility and for avoiding the trappings of fame whenever possible. The last thing he had wanted was for a simple act of kindness to become a public spectacle. But as he read through the thousands of comments online and watched how the story was inspiring others to perform their own acts of kindness, he realized that this wasn't about him. The story had taken on a life of its own, transcending his celebrity status and becoming something much bigger, a symbol of humanity's potential for goodness. Keanu sat in his living room, the soft glow of the evening sun casting long shadows across the floor, as he read through more messages and articles. One particular comment stuck with him. If Keanu Reeves can make a difference with something as simple as buying a meal, maybe I can too. It wasn't just about the grand gestures or the headline-worthy actions. It was about the everyday choices people made to lift each other up. And in that realization, Keanu felt a quiet satisfaction. This was the kind of legacy he wanted to leave behind, Not just the roles he played on screen, but the lives he touched off-screen. Still, there was one thing gnawing at him. He hadn't expected any recognition for his gesture, but now that the story was out there, he felt a pull to connect with Tom and Emily again, not for publicity, but to see how they were doing, to offer more help if they needed it. But how could he reach them without making it feel forced or intrusive? He didn't want to disrupt their lives further, but the thought of leaving things as they were didn't sit right with him. Meanwhile, back in Tom's small apartment, another unexpected twist was about to unfold. One evening, as Tom was sorting through the mountain of messages he had received, an email caught his eye. It was from someone claiming to be Keanu Reeves' assistant. At first, Tom thought it was a scam. After all, the internet was full of people trying to take advantage of others. But something about the tone of the message felt genuine. It was simple, respectful, and direct. The assistant explained that Keanu had seen the story and wanted to meet Tom and Emily in person if they were comfortable with it. Tom's heart pounded in his chest as he reread the email. The idea of meeting Keanu again felt almost too surreal to process. He glanced over at Emily, who was sprawled on the floor, coloring with a set of crayons they'd been gifted by a stranger just days before. How could he say no? This wasn't just about gratitude anymore. It was about closure, about acknowledging the profound impact that brief encounter had on their lives. The next morning, Tom replied to the email, cautiously agreeing to meet. He didn't tell Emily right away, wanting to make sure everything was set before getting her hopes up. But as the day of the meeting approached, he could hardly contain his own excitement and nervousness. He kept wondering what he would say, how he could possibly express the depth of his gratitude without sounding overwhelmed or awkward. It wasn't just about the meal. It was about the ripple effect that single act had created in their lives. When the day finally arrived, Tom and Emily made their way to a quiet cafe in a less crowded part of the city, as arranged by Keanu's assistant. The cafe was small and cozy, much like Maggie's Deli, with a warm, inviting atmosphere. As they entered, Tom felt his heart rate spike. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on a familiar figure sitting at a corner table, dressed in his usual understated style. Dark jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and a gentle, unassuming demeanor that seemed to make him blend in despite who he was. Keanu stood up as they approached, a warm, genuine smile spreading across his face. "Hey, Tom," he said softly, extending his hand. "And you must be Emily." Emily's eyes widened with recognition and excitement. She clutched Tom's hand tightly, but managed a shy smile. "You're the pancake fairy," she exclaimed, her voice filled with wonder. Keanu chuckled, his eyes lighting up. "I guess I am," he replied, kneeling slightly to be at her level. "But I think you made those pancakes magical with your smile." Tom felt a lump form in his throat as he shook Keanu's hand, the weight of everything they'd been through rushing over him. They sat down together, and for a while, the conversation flowed easily. They talked about simple things, Emily's favorite cartoons, Keanu's love for motorcycles, and even the weather. But eventually, Tom found the courage to say what had been on his heart since that day at the diner. "I don't know how to thank you," Tom began, his voice thick with emotion. "What you did, it wasn't just about the meal. It reminded me that people still care. It gave me the strength to keep going, to believe that things could get better." Keanu listened intently, nodding softly. "You don't have to thank me, Tom," he replied. "Sometimes the smallest acts can make the biggest difference. But it's people like you who inspire me. You kept going for Emily. That's what matters." The conversation continued, weaving between lighthearted stories and deeper reflections. By the time they left the cafe, it felt less like a meeting between a struggling father and a famous actor, and more like the beginning of a genuine friendship. They exchanged contact information, with Keanu offering to help in any way he could, whether it was finding job opportunities for Tom or just being there for support. As they walked home, Emily skipped ahead, humming a tune as she swung her arms. Tom watched her, feeling lighter than he had in months. The encounter with Keanu hadn't just changed their circumstances, it had changed their outlook on life. And while the world might have seen it as a simple act of kindness from a celebrity, for Tom and Emily, it was the moment everything began to turn around. But life had more in store for them. This wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning of something even greater, an unexpected friendship that would continue to ripple outwards, touching more lives than they could have ever imagined. The days that followed their meeting at the cafe felt like stepping into an entirely new chapter of life for Tom and Emily. The heaviness that had once clung to Tom's every thought began to lift, replaced by a cautious but growing sense of hope. Meeting Keanu Reeves had been surreal, but it wasn't just the fact that he was a movie star that had impacted Tom. It was his genuine warmth, his quiet humility, and the way he treated Tom and Emily as if they were old friends, not just strangers he'd helped once. Tom found himself replaying their conversation in his head during the quiet moments, while walking Emily to school, while standing in line at the grocery store, while lying awake at night listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing from the next room. Keanu hadn't offered him pity, and he hadn't swooped in to fix everything with grand gestures. Instead, he had offered something much more meaningful: respect, understanding, and the kind of support that made Tom believe he was capable of standing on his own 2 feet again. True to his word, Keanu stayed in touch. It wasn't the kind of relationship that revolved around constant contact or dramatic interventions. Keanu wasn't trying to play the role of a savior, and Tom appreciated that more than anything. Their connection was built on mutual respect and the simple, powerful understanding that sometimes the right kind of support could come from the most unexpected places. A few weeks after their meeting, Keanu sent Tom an email with a list of potential job opportunities. He had quietly reached out to some friends in different industries, not drawing attention to his involvement, but making sure doors were opened where they might have otherwise remained shut. One of the opportunities stood out to Tom: a maintenance position at a local community center. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work, and it was in a place that felt meaningful. The community center served as a hub for after-school programs, family support services, and neighborhood events. It was the kind of environment where Tom felt he could contribute, not just clock in and out. Tom applied for the job, and within days, he was called in for an interview. He was nervous, more nervous than he had been in a long time. But when he walked into the community center and saw kids laughing in the hallways and families gathering in the common rooms, he felt something shift inside him. This was a place full of life and purpose, and he wanted to be part of that energy. The interview went better than he could have hoped. The director of the center, a kind woman named Lisa, was impressed by Tom's honesty and his eagerness to be involved in the community. She didn't ask about his past struggles, and he didn't offer them up. Instead, they focused on what he could bring to the role: his reliability, his hands-on skills, and his desire to create a safe, welcoming environment for the people who relied on the center. By the end of the week, Tom received a call offering him the job. He could hardly believe it. After months of rejection and dead ends, someone had finally given him a chance. When he hung up the phone, Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, coloring one of her endless stacks of drawings. He scooped her up into his arms, spinning her around as he laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. "Guess what, kiddo?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Daddy's got a job." Emily's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Does that mean we can get more pancakes?" Tom laughed, hugging her tightly. "Yeah, sweetheart, I think we can get all the pancakes you want." But it wasn't just about pancakes. It was about stability, about finally being able to provide for Emily without the constant fear of falling short. It was about reclaiming his sense of self-worth and showing his daughter that no matter how hard life got, perseverance and kindness could pave the way to better days. Starting the job at the community center felt like stepping into a new world. The work was hard, but it was honest, and every day Tom felt himself growing stronger, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. He fixed leaky pipes, painted walls, and repaired broken equipment, But he also found himself becoming part of the fabric of the community. The kids knew him by name, the parents trusted him, and for the first time in a long while, Tom felt like he belonged somewhere. Emily thrived in this new environment too. The community center offered after-school programs that she eagerly joined, arts and crafts, music classes, even a small theater group where she discovered a love for storytelling. She made friends quickly, her natural charm and curiosity winning over everyone she met. Watching her blossom in this supportive environment filled Tom with a pride that words couldn't fully capture. Throughout all of this, Keanu remained a quiet presence in their lives. They exchanged occasional emails and texts, sometimes meeting for coffee when Keanu's schedule allowed. It wasn't about gratitude anymore. It was about friendship. Keanu would ask about Emily's latest adventures, and Tom would share stories about his work at the community center. Their bond was simple but profound, rooted in a shared belief in the power of small, meaningful actions. One evening, a few months into Tom's new job, Keanu invited them to a charity event he was hosting. It was a fundraiser for children's education programs, something Keanu was deeply passionate about. At first, Tom hesitated. The idea of stepping into a world filled with celebrities and high-profile donors felt intimidating. But Keanu assured him it wasn't about that. It was about celebrating the power of community and giving back. When the night of the event arrived, Tom and Emily dressed in their best clothes, simple but neat, and made their way to the venue, a beautiful old theater in downtown Los Angeles. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement, and as they entered, Tom felt a wave of nervousness wash over him. But the moment they spotted Keanu, standing by the entrance with his familiar warm smile, those nerves melted away. Keanu greeted them like family, introducing them to people not as charity cases but as friends. Tom was amazed at how grounded Keanu remained, even in the midst of all the glitz and glamour. He wasn't there for the spotlight. He was there to make a difference. During the event, something unexpected happened. As the evening drew to a close, Keanu took the stage to give a closing speech. He talked about the importance of kindness, of recognizing the humanity in one another, and the incredible ripple effect a single act could have. Then, to Tom's surprise, Keanu shared their story, not to spotlight himself, but to highlight how resilience and community could transform lives. "There's a family here tonight," Keanu said, his voice steady and heartfelt. "A father and daughter who remind me every day why we do what we do. They faced challenges, but they never gave up. And their story isn't just about overcoming hardship. It's about how small acts of kindness can lead to incredible change. They're proof that we all have the power to make a difference, no matter how big or small." The audience erupted into applause, and Tom felt his eyes sting with tears. It wasn't about the recognition. It was about the validation. His journey, his struggles, and his perseverance mattered. He wasn't invisible anymore. After the event, people approached Tom and Emily, offering words of encouragement and sharing their own stories of hope and resilience. It was overwhelming but beautiful. Tom realized that their story wasn't just theirs anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever faced a difficult time and found their way through. As they left the theater that night, Emily looked up at her father, her eyes shining with happiness. "Daddy," she whispered, "we're not just the pancake family anymore. We're the kindness family." Tom smiled, his heart full. She was right. They were more than their struggles, more than the challenges they had faced. They were a testament to the power of kindness, perseverance, and the incredible impact of a simple, selfless act. And as they walked into the cool night, hand in hand, Tom knew this was just the beginning of an even greater journey, one where they would continue to spread the kindness they had received, touching lives just as theirs had been touched. Months passed, and the story of Tom and Emily continued to ripple outward, far beyond the quiet corners of their neighborhood or even the bustling streets of Los Angeles. What had started as a simple act of kindness had grown into something neither Keanu nor Tom could have imagined. But as their lives moved forward, they found themselves navigating the complexities that come with sudden change. Not just the opportunities, but the unexpected challenges that accompany being thrust into the public eye. For Tom, the new job at the community center had become more than just a way to pay the bills. It gave him a sense of purpose, a reason to get up every morning with pride. His days were filled with fixing things: leaky pipes, broken doors, squeaky floors. But it wasn't just the physical repairs that mattered. He was also mending the parts of himself that had been frayed from years of struggle. The laughter of children echoing through the halls, the smiles from parents who knew they could rely on him. It all stitched together the confidence he lost during those darker times. Emily thrived in this new chapter of their lives. She was no longer the quiet, reserved little girl who clung to her father's side. At the community center, she discovered her love for storytelling and performance, often standing on the small stage during after-school programs, weaving tales that left her audience, whether it was her peers or adults, enchanted. She became a bit of a local celebrity, known affectionately as the Pancake Girl among the other kids, though she wore the title with a playful pride rather than embarrassment. Despite all the positive changes, Tom found himself grappling with an unexpected weight. The more their stories spread, the more people saw him as a symbol of resilience and hope, rather than just a regular guy trying to do his best for his daughter. Strangers approached him on the street, thanking him for sharing his journey, telling him how his perseverance had inspired them. While Tom appreciated the kindness, it also made him uncomfortable at times. He didn't feel like a hero. He was just a father who'd been in the right place at the right time, saved by the kindness of a stranger who didn't even want recognition. Keanu, too, felt the shift. While he'd always been comfortable in his role as an actor, he had never sought out the spotlight when it came to his personal life. The public's fascination with his involvement in Tom and Emily's story brought a new level of attention he hadn't anticipated. But Keanu handled it with his usual grace, focusing on the bigger picture. To him, it wasn't about how many people knew his name. It was about how many lives could be touched by the reminder that kindness still mattered in a world that often seemed to forget. Their friendship deepened over time, built on shared experiences and quiet understanding. Keanu didn't hover or try to fix everything in Tom's life. Instead, he offered steady support, checking in when it felt natural, sharing moments of laughter over coffee, and showing up for the milestones that mattered. When Emily had her first school play, Keanu sat quietly in the back row, cheering her on with the same enthusiasm he might have shown at a movie premiere. But life, as it often does, had its own plans. One evening, after finishing his shift at the community center, Tom received a phone call that would shake the newfound stability he had worked so hard to build. It was from his landlord, informing him that the apartment building he and Emily lived in had been sold to a new developer. The entire building was being renovated, and all tenants were being asked to vacate within 60 days. The news hit Tom like a punch to the gut. After everything they'd been through, just when life was finally settling into something manageable, they were facing uncertainty again. Tom tried to stay calm, not wanting to worry Emily. But the weight of the situation gnawed at him. Rent in Los Angeles was skyrocketing, and despite his steady job, finding an affordable place in a safe neighborhood felt like an impossible task. The idea of uprooting Emily from her school, her friends, and the community center she loved tore at his heart. He'd promised her stability, and now that promise felt fragile. For a few days, Tom kept the news to himself, hoping he'd find a solution before it came to sharing the burden with anyone else. He spent his evenings scouring rental listings, making calls, and visiting apartments that were either too expensive, too far from the community center, or in neighborhoods he didn't feel comfortable raising his daughter in. The stress began to wear on him, the familiar heaviness creeping back into his thoughts. It wasn't until Keanu called to check in that Tom finally opened up. They met at their usual cafe, the same cozy spot where their friendship had started. Keanu listened quietly as Tom explained the situation, his face calm but his eyes filled with understanding. When Tom finished, Keanu leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Tom," Keanu said softly, "you've come so far. You don't have to do this alone." Tom shook his head, a mixture of pride and stubbornness tightening his chest. I appreciate that, Keanu. I really do. But I've leaned on you enough. I need to figure this out on my own. Keanu smiled, a warm, knowing look crossing his face. I'm not here to fix things for you, but sometimes, even the strongest people need a little help. And that's not weakness. That's just life. They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. Finally, Keanu pulled out his phone and opened an email he'd received earlier that week. It was from a friend who ran a nonprofit organization focused on affordable housing initiatives in Los Angeles. They had recently renovated a small apartment complex designed specifically for working families, offering reduced rent to those who were part of community service programs, like Tom's job at the community center. Keanu slid the phone across the table. Just take a look. No strings attached. Tom hesitated, his pride still wrestling with the reality of the situation. But as he read through the email, hope flickered in his chest. The apartments were affordable, close to Emily's school and the community center, and most importantly, they offered the stability he'd been fighting so hard to secure. A week later, after meeting with the nonprofit's director and touring the apartment, Tom signed the lease. The new place was small but bright, with large windows that let in the morning sun and a tiny balcony where Emily immediately decided they would grow flowers. It wasn't just a roof over their heads. It was a fresh start, a chance to build something lasting. Moving day was filled with laughter and exhaustion. Friends from the community center pitched in, and to Tom's surprise, Keanu showed up too, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, ready to carry boxes like everyone else. There was no fanfare, no special treatment, just friends helping friends, working together to create a home. That evening, after the last box had been unpacked and the pizza boxes were stacked on the kitchen counter, Tom and Emily sat on the balcony, watching the sun set over their new neighborhood. Keanu joined them, a quiet presence as they soaked in the moment. Emily leaned her head against her father's shoulder, her voice soft but filled with certainty. Daddy, I think this is our forever home. Tom felt his throat tighten, but he smiled, pressing a kiss to her hair. Yeah, sweetheart, I think you're right. Keanu looked out at the horizon, his expression thoughtful. It's funny, he murmured, how one small moment can change everything. Tom nodded, his heart full. Yeah, but it's the people who show up afterward that really make it count. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, they sat together in comfortable silence, a reminder that life's most meaningful journeys aren't always the ones we plan. Sometimes they're the ones we stumble into, guided by the unexpected kindness of a stranger who becomes family. A year had passed since Tom and Emily moved into their new apartment, and life had settled into a rhythm neither of them had dared to dream of during their hardest days. The weight of uncertainty that had once shadowed Tom's every step was now a distant memory, replaced by a steady, fulfilling routine that gave both him and Emily the stability they had long craved. But more than just stability, they had found something even rarer, a sense of belonging and purpose that rippled through every part of their lives. Tom's role at the community center had evolved far beyond simple maintenance work. His dedication and natural ability to connect with people hadn't gone unnoticed. Lisa, the center's director, saw in him a leader, someone who wasn't just fixing broken pipes and patching walls, but also quietly mending the hearts and spirits of those who walked through the center's doors. She offered him a promotion to facilities and outreach coordinator, a role that not only allowed him to manage the physical upkeep of the building, but also gave him a hand in planning programs and events for the community. At first, Tom hesitated. He wasn't used to seeing himself in any kind of leadership role, and the idea of stepping into a position with more responsibility felt intimidating. But as he thought about everything he'd overcome, the nights he'd spent wondering where their next meal would come from, the weight of not knowing how to care for Emily, and the quiet, unwavering support from Keanu, he realized that he was ready. He accepted the position, determined to give back to the community that had embraced him and Emily with open arms. With his new role, Tom found himself immersed in projects that reignited his passion for helping others. He coordinated after-school programs, organized community cleanup days, and even started a kindness initiative, inspired by the simple act that had changed his and Emily's lives. The initiative encouraged people in the community to perform small acts of kindness, whether it was paying for a stranger's coffee, offering a helping hand to a neighbor, or volunteering their time at the center. Stories of these acts began to circulate, creating a ripple effect that spread far beyond the walls of the center. Emily, now 8 years old, flourished in this nurturing environment. Her love for storytelling had grown into something remarkable. She began writing her own short stories, often drawing from their experiences, weaving tales of heroes who overcame adversity not with superpowers, but with kindness and courage. Her teachers took notice of her talent and encouraged her to submit her stories to local writing contests. To Tom's amazement, Emily won several of them, her stories touching the hearts of everyone who read them. One of her stories, titled The Pancake Fairy, was particularly special. It was a fictionalized version of the day Keanu had bought them lunch, told through Emily's imaginative lens. In her story, the Pancake Fairy wasn't just a magical figure who appeared to give food, but a symbol of hope that inspired people to be kind to one another. The story was simple, heartfelt, and resonated with people in a way that words rarely do. When Emily's story was published in a local magazine, it caught the attention of a children's book publisher. They reached out to Tom and Emily with an offer to turn The Pancake Fairy into a picture book, complete with illustrations and a message about the power of kindness. Tom was hesitant at first, worried about exposing more of their personal story to the public. But Emily, wise beyond her years, reminded him that their story wasn't just theirs anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever needed a little hope. The book was published within months and quickly gained popularity, not just in their community but across the country. It was used in classrooms to teach children about empathy and compassion, and families read it together as a reminder of the goodness that could be found in the world. Emily's face lit up every time she saw someone reading her book, and Tom's heart swelled with pride knowing how far they had come. Keanu, of course, was there for every milestone. He attended Emily's book launch, standing quietly in the background, watching with pride as she signed copies and answered questions from curious readers. When it was his turn to get his book signed, he knelt down in front of Emily, handing her the copy with a playful grin. "To the real Pancake Fairy," he said softly. Emily giggled as she carefully signed her name, adding a little diddle of a pancake with wings. "To my favorite movie star and real-life hero," she wrote. Keanu smiled, his heart full. For all the roles he played on screen, none of them compared to the quiet, profound impact of being part of Tom and Emily's lives. But their story wasn't just one of personal triumph. It became a movement. The success of The Pancake Fairy and the Kindness Initiative at the community center sparked a larger conversation about how communities could support one another through small, meaningful actions. Inspired by Tom and Emily's journey, other cities began adopting similar programs, creating networks of kindness that stretched across states and eventually the country. Media outlets revisited their story, not as a feel-good headline, but as a testament to the enduring power of compassion. Tom was invited to speak at events, sharing his experiences and encouraging others to look out for the people in their own communities. Though he never got used to the attention, he embraced the opportunity to spread a message that had become his life's mission. Kindness isn't just about grand gestures. It's about showing up, day after day, for the people around you. One day, nearly 2 years after that fateful lunch at Maggie's Deli, Tom received an invitation to speak at a national conference on community resilience and kindness. It was an honor he never would have imagined for himself, but he accepted, knowing that his story could inspire others facing the same struggles he once did. As he stood on stage, looking out at an audience filled with community leaders, educators, and families, he felt a wave of emotion wash over him. I'm not here because I did something extraordinary, Tom began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I'm here because someone took a moment out of their day to see me, not as a problem to be solved, but as a person who mattered. That small act of kindness didn't just fill our stomachs. It filled our hearts. And it reminded me that even in our darkest moments, there's light to be found if we're willing to look for it in each other. The room was silent, the weight of his words settling over the crowd like a warm blanket. When he finished, the audience erupted into applause, not for the story itself, but for the reminder that kindness wasn't just a concept, it was a choice. After the conference, as Tom and Emily walked through the city streets, hand in hand, they reflected on how far they had come. The journey hadn't been easy, but every challenge, every setback, had led them to this moment. They were living proof that the smallest gestures could lead to the biggest changes. That evening, they met Keanu at Maggie's Deli, the place where it all began. The diner hadn't changed much, the same checkered tablecloths, the same flickering neon sign, and the familiar smell of fresh bread greeted them as they walked in. They sat at the same corner table where Keanu had first noticed them, sharing a quiet meal together. As they ate, Emily looked up at Keanu, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Do you think there are other pancake fairies out there?" she asked. Keanu chuckled, his eyes softening. "I think there are a lot of pancake fairies out there," he replied. "And I think you've helped create even more." Tom smiled, looking around the diner that had once felt like a place of silent struggle, but now felt like a symbol of hope. "Yeah," he said quietly, "and maybe the real magic isn't just in pancakes. Maybe it's in the people who care enough to show up when it matters." As they finished their meal and stepped out into the cool evening air, Tom, Emily, and Keanu walked down the street together, their laughter mingling with the sounds of the city. They were no longer just a struggling father and daughter and a kind stranger. They were a family forged by kindness, resilience, and the unwavering belief that even the smallest act could change a life. And somewhere, in another corner of the world, someone else would hear their story and be inspired to perform a small act of kindness, starting a new ripple that would touch hearts in ways none of them could have ever imagined. Because in the end, that was the true power of their story. It wasn't just about how it began, but how it continued to live on in the hearts of everyone it touched.